Hey, this is Zustiak, editor for Gamingtrend. I recently interviewed developer WayForward about their upcoming game, Yars Rising. Specifically, I got to talk with the director of the game, James Montagna, about all kinds of things, like how to pronounce his name, to circumstances surrounding the game's development. Although we dive deep into a lot of the little details about the game and the thought process that went into Yars Rising specifically, he also offered a lot of insight into what goes into other games like this and how WayForward functions as a whole. Some of his insights may even prove helpful for your own creative endeavors. James gave great detailed answers to my, let's call them musings, so I hope you enjoy. If you do, please consider helping us out with the usual YouTube stuff like liking, commenting, subscribing, or just share the interview with someone you know who might be into games about giant flies. That all said, let's get into it. All right. Hi, this is Jack Zustiak from Gamingtrend. Got an interview here with James Montagna. I'm sorry, is it Montagna or is it?
It's Montagna, like
Montagna.
lasagna.
Okay, got it. All right, perfect. So I'm here with James talking about Yars Rising, Yars, and just all kinds of stuff, really. If you'll answer, we'll see.
We'll see.
And maybe, we'll start with an easy one, I think.
Sure, whatever you want to ask.
Unless you want to get existential about it. I mean, like,
we can go whatever way you want to go.
Yeah, sure. Like, who are you in terms of like what you're doing with Yars Rising? Like, what's your role? What do you do day to day?
So I am the director of Yars Rising. Designer and director is what it says on my business card. And so what that entails, as a designer, my job is to create essentially the blueprint of the game. So that for the sake of Yars Rising, we had a concept, we knew kind of what we wanted to do. And so I basically created the game design document or blueprint with all the nitty-gritty details of how we're going to achieve those things. And then my job as director is working with the team day to day to realize the vision in that blueprint, or see where we need to veer off and change things, and just playing the game every day, giving feedback to the team, working closely with the team to realize the vision of making something wonderful together. And that's what a designer director does, and that's what I did for here for Yars Rising.
Cool. So how big is your team?
You know what? That's a difficult question to answer for a couple of reasons. We have some staff that work here on site in the WayForward building where I am right now, but we also have people that work remote, and then we have some people that work like contracts, so they'll work like for a little bit, and then they'll jump to another project. So it's hard to say, but I would say overall for the scope of like WayForward games historically, we have like a medium-sized team.
Okay. How long have you been working on Yars Rising for?
So for this project, it's been in development. I think we started formal development sometime in 2022. At least that's when we were having the conversations about what type of game we should make together. And I think that's when it was greenlit and we started like creating assets for the game and putting things together. So it's been in development for a bit here.
Is that typical for this kind of game, or is it like, how does it work these days?
It varies from game to game. I've been doing this at WayForward. I've been a WayForward director for going on 18 years now, and it really varies based on the scope of the game you're trying to achieve, the platform. If the game is multi-platform, it makes a difference. I think this is kind of standard nowadays, though. As games get more and more, I guess, intricate and complex, and we can do cooler stuff with them, with that comes more development time. So I think this is probably like the current like normal development cycle for us.
No, I'm interested just because I love the kinds of games that WayForward makes. All these like smaller kind of like focused games like that. Yeah. But it does seem like from an outside perspective, things like just take so much longer now. I'm sure you feel that just as a developer, and you've been at WayForward a long time. I looked at what you're doing. Like, you've done almost all the Shantaes and stuff. So like you've done a lot of work with that, and so appreciate that. And so I just kind of want to get an idea of like how even a development of a game looks like these days for this kinds of game. So
yeah, we're really giving it our all for Yars Rising. We wanted to make sure this is a WayForward game. And when Atari came to us, that was one of the things they said. They said, we want you to make a WayForward game. And like, well, what does that mean? Like, I guess for us, it's like, just do the thing that you're good at. You go by your instincts. And Atari, throughout the development of Yars Rising, has been very supportive of the vision of the game WayForward wanted to create. So it wasn't like they were steering us or telling us what to do, or they really believed in us. And I think it will show in this game, because when you play it, it has the identity and the things that make it feel like a WayForward game, but it's also like very fresh.
Yeah, I was actually kind of wondering how that worked too. So I thought I read somewhere that, you guys pitched this game, but was it one of those things where like Atari was actually going, what we're saying, like you said, we want a way forward game from you guys, or how did that work?
So, I mean, I wasn't at the outset of like the discussions. I joined once we kind of like had settled on what IP it was going to be, and then we started fleshing out from there. But I was told that it was a conversation back and forth where WayForward and Atari hadn't worked together in many years. And, Atari as a company is always evolving and changing. And the current folks at Atari weren't there when we worked with Atari many years ago on the game Centipede Infestation, which was on Wii and I believe Nintendo 3DS. And so it had been a while. We got to talking with the folks there, and the new president of Atari, Wade Rosen, who's awesome and really believed in us. He had a conversation with our business development manager, Adam Tierney, and it was basically a really cool, like, what should we make together? And, as you know, Atari is one of the oldest names in gaming, and therefore they have some of the most classic brands and intellectual properties in all of the gaming history. So there's so many things we could do together, but we had an idea for Yars that we put together a proposal of, and I think there was just like a lot of excitement on our end about it, and that came through because when we gave it to Atari, they met us with like a similar level of excitement about it, and the sentiment between our companies was like, we have to make this game. And so that's sort of like how it evolved from there. There's other games properties we talked about, but this was like the one. It just felt like there's something really special about the seed of an idea that we had planted.
Did you like when you concepted this game, did you have a specific, like, I mean, obviously as a game developer, you want everyone to play your game ever, right? But do you have like a specific target audience in mind when you were making this, or like
Everybody,
designing this?
I want everyone to play this game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess a better answer for you would be, when we create something like this, we want to make sure that, because this is a known beloved IP. I mean, it was released in 1982, for crying out loud. This is a very old IP. There are people that it means a lot to them. It's incredibly classic. They grew up playing it. And so we always want to respect that. So when I think about like the target audience, I first and foremost think of the people that know and love Yars. And of course, we are those people as well. We love it. And so we want to make sure to create something that is very much respectful to the original game and Howard Scott Warshaw, the original creator of Yars Revenge, while also, giving it our own spin and adding like our own identity to it. So that's one sort of facet of like audience of this game. But from there, I think of remaking and bringing back brands as like a form of, I guess you could call it almost a form of gaming preservation. I talked about this a couple of times before because a couple of people have asked, but I'll give you like a little bit more like what I actually mean by that. When we get the opportunity to remake a game or re-envision a brand, a classic gaming brand, what we're actually doing is giving it a new life and reinvigorating it for the future. So not only does it make it so this brand and IP can go on and on into the future, it has a side effect of people that have maybe never heard of Yars Revenge on the Atari 2600 are now going to learn about it and go back and play it. So it's our way of like showing people the past, like the thing that we grew up and think is so cool, but also giving it life so it can extend into the future. And that's just one way of preservation. You have things like the Atari 50 collection, which are like giving you the games as they were, which is also a very valid and another important way of preservation. So that's kind of like the way I think about it. The people that love and grew up with Yars, and maybe this new audience that's never heard of it.
Going into this project, how like familiar were you with Yars? Like, did you have to do like a lot of playing, or were you already like into it, or?
So here at WayForward, I think you have a lot of people that are we just love games. We're just very passionate about games. And so a lot of us are like walking video game encyclopedias. So of course I knew Yars Revenge. It was released before I was born. But regardless, just as I fancy myself a gaming historian. I played the Atari games. Offhand, I knew it immediately, and I had like visions in my mind of it, like, oh, it's that game with the co-tile and the fly, and it's like so colorful, and it's interesting, like droning noise and sound. It was like so unique for the Atari 2600. So that was like my impression of Yars. The moment they said we're thinking of like bringing back Yars, I was like in my mind, like, oh, that's like the psychedelic visuals, and I had my own sort of like vision ideas right off the bat. So it wasn't like we had to like go research it and learn what it is. That being said, once we knew we wanted to make this game, we take it very seriously when we're like honored by being handed an IP from a company like Atari. So I did my homework and I absorbed as much Yars Revenge knowledge that I could possibly get my hands on. I played every iteration of the game. I looked up the original, like I got my hands on the original comic book that came with the Atari 2600 game, and like read the lore. And we went as far as like listen to like the vinyl records that were released like in sync with the game back in 1982, which has its own like music and extra lore and story that it added. And we took notes. We basically absorbed everything we could. I listened to and read everything of the original creator, Howard Scott Warshaw, that I could. I just absorbed it so I could embody like his thought process, his vision, his intent behind it. And then, of course, we reinvent it and do our thing. But we are coming at it with the knowledge of what we are handed.
All right, so you're a certified Yars head now.
I guess you could say so. Yeah, I'm creating things in the Yarniverse.
um, so I mean, obviously, it sounds like you did all this research, you've been working on this game. I mean, what would you say are the key components that make like a game a Yars game?
Make a game a Yars game. Well, I think there's, looking back at the original Yars, there was a lot of firsts for that game. It was a really special game. The first and foremost I'll bring up is it had lore and a story, and I think that's so important for Yars. It was one of the first games that had like a lore or like a deep story behind it, and because back then there's only so much you could do and represent on screen the story you could tell with rudimentary graphics and visuals and console capabilities. But Yars took an interesting angle, and I alluded to it a couple minutes ago, but the game was actually packed with a comic book inside, like in I don't want to say in lieu of instruction manual, because it did have an instruction manual, but included alongside that was a comic that sets up the lore and background and the story of the game. So what makes a Yar game, you asked? First and foremost, it's got to have story, right? It's got to have a deep lore and a story and a lot of stuff going on under the hood that you can learn about and understand. And so, of course, we honored that. And another thing that is important for Yars is it's one of the first games with like Easter eggs in it. There was like a lot of like hidden meanings in the names of things, and things that if you manipulate something a certain way, it would reveal something to you. And of course, this game, well, I don't want to give away too much, but we definitely honored that aspect of Yars as well. And of course, there's the classic Yars gameplay, which we do bring back in certain ways, even though at first glance it doesn't appear to be that. And you know, the colorful visuals and just like this pop style, we do honor the original game in a lot of ways. And so, as far as what makes a Yar game, I think it's those things and more. And we've done everything we can to honor and treat it with reverence.
And so when I think of, WayForward, when they revisit old games like Contra or whatever that just came out, I mean, because you brought up an interesting point about, these old games, they're kind of abstract. You have to use your imagination as kind of like a launching point for these. And I think of a lot of the WayForward revivals, they're kind of making things like more concrete, right? Like there's like lore and here's all this stuff. And, we're kind of trying to tie all of it together, even if that wasn't, it was a little crazier back then. Do you feel like things are better concrete that way? Like, obviously that's what you guys like to do, but I mean, do you feel like, I guess just in general, do you think that there's something lost in just the way that things have been more concrete these days versus how it used to be?
I think they're all valid approaches. There's no like one right way to make a game. I love the idea of abstract visuals, and I inject my imagination into it to sort of build on what I'm seeing. And I think even in current games, there's room for imagination. There's the things that you don't see off camera that now you imagine like what that looks like, what the deeper world that you don't get to observe as a player looks like. So there's always a place for imagination in games. So I don't know that something's lost. It's just different.
Okay. And so was there any like, because like you said, I mean, the current Yars Rising is very different at first, at glance from the original Yars Revenge.
Right.
I mean, is there any specific connection that WayForward made to like say, oh, let's take Yars Revenge and like make it like a Metroid game? Like, what was the connection there?
I think it was just incidental. And by that I mean we knew the story that we wanted to tell, and we knew like the way we could portray it. So that is just part of why we landed on the approach that we did. But also it's a matter of giving players something that perhaps even they didn't know they wanted, surprising people. If we took the expected route and just did like a remake of Yars and you're just flying like bug alien, we could do that, right? But I don't know that that would make as much of a splash or have as much of an impact on people, or be as cool of a story to tell necessarily as the thing that we were kind of starting to draft and come up with. I'm sure there's a way to do it, but this you're going to feel a unique, interesting twist, and you'll feel our identity through the way we have approached it. So, uh, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Okay. And I guess part of it too, and you're free to disagree with anything I say. So just, but I feel
Lay
like,
it on me.
yeah, well, like 20 years ago, there weren't. I mean, there was like an occasional Metroid, and always kind of felt like special, like, oh, this is a cool Metroid game that's outside of normal Metroid or a Castlevania or whatever. And now I feel like these days, I mean, there's a lot of them, right? Like,
Sure.
do
Yeah.
you agree that like that's there's just a lot and it's harder to stand out? And does that affect how you approach Yars Rising?
Not really. I don't like to personally as a creator think about genre of game too much, because I think it can be helpful to help categorize things. So for people to call it like it's a Metroidvania, for instance, that's okay. I mean, it has elements of that. But I think as a creator, if I'm focused too much on genre, it can be a little bit limiting, because when I see Yars Rising, I don't necessarily see, oh, it's a Metroidvania. I see it's its own sort of thing. And it has elements of games that we grew up on and love, like Metroid games, Castlevania games, but also takes elements from other things too, like WarioWare, for instance. And people don't expect that, but it definitely is like, well, if you have like a Metroid influence and a little bit of a WarioWare influence, and you bring that Yars sort of essence in, what do you get when you mix all that up? And of course, we pull from other places too. We pull influence from games like Resident Evil 4. What does that mean? Like we're taking all these things and creating something unique and new. And yeah, you could call it by a genre if it helps, but I don't get too caught up on that. And while there is a lot of this style of game, the more the merrier, I say. That's fine.
Okay. And so one thing I saw is that you got like a degree of like stealth gameplay in there.
Right.
Um, so I guess just in general, like how are you approaching? Because stealth can be difficult, I think, if you're like throwing it into a game where like other stuff's going on, right? If it's not specifically focused on stealth, like, so how do you balance that in terms of like keeping people? I mean, it sounds like you're doing all kinds of different stuff, but like, how do you keep people focused on the main game and not feel like it's an interruption?
That's an excellent question, and it's one that took us a lot of development R&D to kind of crack the solution regarding our approach to it. This game indeed does have a stealth component. I like to refer to it as light stealth, or light stealth elements. And the reason being for that is our unique approach to stealth. I wouldn't say it's an opt-in, but you can choose to just Leroy Jenkins through and just like, I'm gonna get caught and like and see what happens. And it's gonna be hard for you, but you can do it. It's completely acceptable. Like, I'm gonna just like charge through and let them catch me, or I'm gonna mess with the guard. I'm actually gonna shoot the guard so they know I'm there. You make it a little harder for yourself, but it's a completely like okay way to approach playing through. It's valid. But if you happen to want to play by the rules that we've set up in the scene of stealth, you can do that too. It's a little bit freeform, the approach we've taken. So it's not like you get caught and it's game over, back to start. You actually have to get caught and then like defeated or tagged. So I think the approach that we take into stealth, this light stealth, allows it to have the player choice of how they choose to engage with it. And that's where the fun comes in, because I love to watch players that take it very seriously, and they're tiptoeing by, they're crawling through the vent, they're not shooting so they don't make a sound to alert the guard. They're taking it really slow and meticulous. And that's fun. And then you get the players that just, they will charge through, and they'll maybe have to try it several times, but they're enjoying themselves, and both are great.
Is the main incentive then for stuff, is it like just to make things easier, or is there other advantages to it, or is it like, does it feed in different systems?
It does feed into some systems. I think the point of it is really like, no, number one, story and tone setting. So you want to feel this dramatic tension when you enter certain rooms. So we have rooms that are, it breaks up the pacing a little bit by design, right? So we have these action where you're shooting, mowing down these like bug aliens and these like robots in the office building of Kotek, which is the place where the main character Emi Kimura is essentially like infiltrating and hacking from the inside. And those are like fast-paced rooms. And then you go to a stealth room where we slow it down a little bit. And I think that kind of like ebb and flow gives the gameplay a really unique sort of flavor.
And then you also mentioned, I mean, a big part of Yars is like these Easter eggs. And I hate to go back to this, but like in general, Metroid games are kind of like this idea of like finding secrets and like getting upgrades and that kind of stuff. I mean, do you worry about the balance of like secrets? Like, are you concerned that some people, are you okay with like people not finding things, or like how do you think about it?
It's great if they don't find things. That means we did a pretty good job of hiding them, and some players will find them. And it gives them an incentive and a replay value when they clear the game, and it's like, oh, I'm only this percent clear. They'll want to go back and search for it. It's okay. And players that do choose to search are rewarded, and they'll have a different experience. The way we built Yars Rising is, if you choose to explore and go off the beaten path and find things, you'll be rewarded, and you'll have a bit of a different gameplay experience versus somebody that just goes from what we refer to in game design as the golden path, just from one point to another. They go open their Navi menu, they find the beacon for the next place they're supposed to be, and they just beeline there. Totally okay, but you will have a different experience. And I think that's actually a great thing, because every player can approach it their own way and get something a little bit different out of it. And as far as Easter eggs that you mentioned, this game is absolutely bursting with love for Atari. We have so many Atari games that we are fans of that we couldn't help ourselves. So throughout the experience, this game is not just about Yar's revenge. It's a celebration of Atari in so many ways. So I hope players can look forward to seeing what I mean by that.
Do you have like a particular like design ethos in terms of like how a game like feels to control like this? Like, should you know, like how do you approach a game like this? Like, how did you approach the game, like how it controls specifically?
I think someone recently, a company that we work with frequently, told us that, WayForward is really like a play control centric company. And I didn't even realize it at the time. I was like, oh, I guess we are. And it's right down to our core philosophy of classic gaming sensibilities, because a lot of classic games, they're just simple to pick up and play, but we also kind of give it a contemporary feel. And for the sake of development of something like Yars Rising, it goes back to when we first start prototyping it. I personally have a belief that when you're prototyping something out, if it feels good in the most rudimentary form, it's going to feel good, right? So even if there's no artwork and I'm moving around a gray box on screen, but it's doing all the actions that we intend, like the character we mentioned, when we have Emi Kimura there, what she's supposed to do, like I'm hanging off a ledge, I'm sliding down a wall, I'm bouncing off a wall, and like dashing upward. If those things feel good to manipulate in the most rudimentary form, then we've got it. If you need the animations and all those things there for it to feel right, maybe something's not quite right. So I think when you distill and deconstruct the elements of our gameplay down, it's got to be satisfying to pick up and manipulate when you hold the controller, first and foremost. Even if you're just screwing around, like jumping off the walls, you're not doing anything productive per like progressing the game. If it feels nice to manipulate the character, that's really what you're doing throughout the experience. So it should feel great, right? So that's the first thing. And then the next is like the feedback that you get. This can be down to things like sound effects and visuals that help reinforce the thing that already feels good to manipulate. In our case, we paid special attention to detail for Yars Rising. If you play this game on a platform that has features like Nintendo Switch HD Rumble, or the PlayStation 5 DualSense controller with its haptic feedback and sensations, we take full advantage of that with this game. And we went to great lengths to make sure that those sensations reinforce the good feel when you pick up the controller and play. So I definitely recommend players, if they're on those platforms, look out for those, and you'll see what I mean. Little things like sliding down a wall, you'll feel like a brushing like sensation, versus getting hit by something, you'll feel like a more jarring like jolt from the controller, or fluttering down on wings, you'll feel like a skittering, like a tick 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 sensation in the controller. We even do some like stereo like rumble stuff where you feel something in the left or right Joy-Con like separately. And we do similar stuff in the PlayStation 5 DualSense controller. So a lot of attention to detail to make sure that every single player who picks up the controller, it feels satisfying.
That's cool. Like, because I don't know about you, but I'm kind of like let down by like how people don't fully use all that stuff. It feels like in terms of the
Yeah,
DualSense and even HD Rumble. It's like, the launch games, and that was kind of it. So it's so cool that you guys are focusing on that, because that's kind of what I feel like is the next step that no one really wants to do. Is like, obviously there's the typical game feel, but like taking it to the next level without like having to put on a VR headset or something, right? Like,
it's
so
incredibly immersive. It really
yeah,
is.
so that's cool. And then, so like, I guess part of it too, I mean, you mentioned the feedback and how things like kind of like feel just in terms of visuals. I mean,
Right.
when I think of WayForward, obviously you guys have been doing a mix of 2D and 3D for a long time, but like I always kind of feel like you guys are like a 2D company, right? But how do you decide like which games are going to be 2D versus 3D? Usually, is it like a resources thing, or is it just like I want this to be 3D because we can do this, or like how did it work for Yars Rising?
I think we look at it on an individual, like case by case basis, right? A lot of people do know us as a company that achieves great results in the 2D space. But we've also, over the years, if you look at our catalog of games, have done a lot of 3D games as well. So, we have expertise in both. For this particular game, I think the decision was mostly we wanted it to feel a certain way and look a certain way. And so that drove the decision of just like, here's the experience we want to provide to players. And it's just a very instinct driven decision making from early on. Like it probably should look like this.
Are there any particular things that you or the team looked at to kind of get the visual style? I mean, it looks good. So,
Oh,
what were you
thanks.
looking at? So
We often do something like a mood board where we take influence from various places. So I won't name like what all those are, but we did a little exploration early on of things like, okay, well, should it have like cell shaded like look with like toon outlines like around the characters and things like that. We did some experiments of how that might look, the line thickness. Of ultimately we settled like on no outline. And like, how should VFX look? Should they be super cartoony? Should it be like realistic looking water, or should it be like super like blue toony like white foam water? Like, these are the decisions that you have to make when you're deciding the art direction of the game. So we knew we wanted it to be 3D, but that was just a whole exploration process that we went through to land on the results that we landed on. And ultimately, if it feels cool looking, it gives you this cyberpunky vibe, and it feels fresh and contemporary, then I hope we achieved it.
and it sounds like too, I mean, so does WayForward typically start with like the stories and then build the game around that? Because that's kind of what it sounds like from your answer. I guess like how does that typically work?
I don't know that there is a typical.
Oh,
It might be for some games where they're very story centric. Like I said, with Yars, story matters a great deal. Other games, it's like we have a great gameplay hook, and the story can come later. I think for one of the games I directed, Vitamin Connection, I didn't know what the story of the game would be, but I knew the sensations I wanted in the controller, and I knew the gameplay hooks I wanted to have. And so once I had all that like clay on the wheel, then I could come up with like a story based around it. In this case, again, there's no typical approach really. In this case, we knew the story we wanted to tell with this character, Emmy, and she's this girl living in the future, and she's like a college dropout hacker, black hat hacker for hire, and she wants to infiltrate this like shadowy corporation, mega conglomerate, Kotek, and it's this whole thing where she is hacking them and gets caught up in this big alien conspiracy. And it was like, okay, so we know the story we want to tell. What gameplay can we use to achieve that? And that's how we kind of landed on the results that we did.
And if you could, like, obviously Emmy's not a giant fly. So like, how did you get from giant fly to this concept?
Well, I think it's, I don't want to give away too much, but I think it's a little bit of leaning into surprising players and the curveball of expectations. I think for WayForward, a lot of people are like, well, WayForward games always have like these like strong female lead characters. And it's like, yeah, we do. Maybe we're like undoing years of not having that by focusing a lot on that. But it's also a matter of, we knew this character would best tell the story that we wanted to tell, and we find ways of honoring that bug identity. Again, I don't want to give away too much, but it is obviously not the classic Yar character, Yar alien that you know from the original games. But I look forward to seeing people's reactions if they're expecting that, when they play through the game. I know I'm being cryptic.
Yeah, that's totally fine. The other thing I wanted to talk about, you mentioned it way at the beginning. I was kind of glad you did. Is I feel like Yars has that really cool ambient like sound to it, right? Like that kind of like almost white noise kind of thing. And did it influence the sound design for Yars Rising, or like how did that affect things for you?
Yeah, of course. That sound you hear in the original game is like this interesting like droning effect. It's like looping, like droning effect. And it was just so iconic that we knew for this game, one thing that would be very important is environmental sound design. And so one way we honor that sort of element of the classic Yars game is, everywhere you go in this game, when you're in the office, there's the hum of like computers and fans running in server rooms. And this, whenever you like move from room to room, you feel like the stereo like sensation of like, okay, there was like some like buzzing thing over there. And it's a very subtle layer that maybe you don't really hear it over the music, which is also very special in this game. But you pick up on it subconsciously. And of course you could volume turn down the music knob and you would hear all those elements, like going out in the city, hearing like the rain sound, or like when you're inside the office building, hearing the rain against the glass window. Environmental sound design was very important because the original game had a bit of that, and the original like game is incorporated into this in ways that we do also have that sort of droning effect when we are referencing the original game in a gameplay manner. So it all ties in so many ways.
Cool. And then you mentioned the music too. I mean, so it has like a more traditional soundtrack as well, but at least from the vibe I got, it's kind of like poppy, kind of like fun, right? Like, how did you decide on that tone for the game?
I think we wanted to reinvent, or invent our own, I should say, version of what cyberpunk is. A lot of people are like, oh, cyberpunk, like Blade Runner sort of thing, which, yeah, of course, that definitely is very defining in that genre. But we didn't want to like follow every single like cyberpunk trope. And so we didn't want it to feel like, I guess, like, I can't find the right word, but like desolate or depressive, or
Yeah,
we,
sad,
we
kind of.
wanted to have we wanted it to have like this kind of like vibe that was energetic and poppy and playful. And so music wise, there's a lot of unique stuff going on. First and foremost, I'll say, might be one of the most ambitious WayForward soundtracks of all time, in terms of even in terms of the number of artists. We have 20 different guest artists involved in the music of this game. It is a very special soundtrack.
Wow.
So that's one thing. And the other thing is like the genre of music that we play with. It all ties in because we wanted something that kind of harkens back to the identity of like the era that this game comes from in ways, but also feels contemporary. And so we call it like a retro future styling. It is pulling from genres that sort of existed back then that are actually kind of coming back and having a resurgence, up and coming again. So like the genre of like city pop music, it's become like a sensation on things like YouTube, and people are like rediscovering music that was released like around the era when Yars was new, or maybe even a little earlier than that. And then so we have a lot of city pop music, but then you have genres like future funk, which are taking that kind of era of music and, changing the tempo and adding like break beats and like a heavy like bass, and doing all these sorts of like, and chopping up the vocals and making it sound super screwed up and cool, and doing like interesting things with it, and reinventing this old thing. And so we touch on that genre of music throughout the game as well, among many others, vaporwave and things that I felt like we're not really seeing in a lot of games right now, but are also either current or up and coming and growing genres of music. We wanted to kind of capture that because the game takes place in the future. So I thought, finding something that feels like bleeding edge of like what people are enjoying now would be important for this game, while respecting the past. So that's the genre element. And then I also touched on the number of artists. And then finally, the approach to music in this game is very much non-traditional in the sense that it is, I guess you could call it Emmy's playlist. So every area that you go to has a unique playlist of music. So it's not just one song. There's several different songs for each different location in the game. And the way it works is it's like the conceit is like Emmy's earbuds. She's like the music she's listening to. And it's like kind of like based on her mood and location, it's concocting a playlist for her because it's future AI tech, I guess. But the way we approached it is it's like a nonstop DJ set. So it will like crossfade, or it'll like interesting transition into the next music track. So you're never like dead music, unless we intentionally want that for dramatic effect, but it'll like crossfade into the next song in a cool way. And just always like changing, evolving, morphing music per area with numerous songs. So that's another really unique thing that I haven't seen done with this type of game before, that Yars Rising has in it.
And as you're talking about that, you're mentioning all these little details of like stuff you're doing with like the headphones and all that. I mean, I have to assume you like have just all this stuff figured out. I mean, is there any kind of detail that you like wish you could get in the game but you weren't able to, or is it like?
Yes. Yes, I won't tell you what it is, but yes.
Oh, okay,
Here's the
all right.
thing. Every single game I have ever worked on, period. There's no game is an exception, has had things that were on the cutting room floor,
Sure.
right? Because when every game we make, we want to make the best game possible. And so we approach it with the utmost ambition. We want to do everything. There was features and things and elements and little attention to detail, things that WayForward's known for throughout the games that we develop, that I wanted to bring into this. And we got a lot of them. I'm very thankful for that. And I think the end result is a really cool game. The more people that play it for the first time are getting amazing reactions. I'm so thankful and honored by that. But in my mind, I'm never happy. Like I always think, but they could have been like this much cooler. So, I think, at least for my games, people might have feedback about them, and I cherish all feedback. But I guarantee you that I'm a more harsh critic than you are of my own work.
Sounds good. No, I get that. It's just like, because it is cool with me, right? Like you guys probably have all this stuff written down, all this stuff that no one gets to see, but but it's out
Well,
there in your brain. So
there's
yeah,
always the future, right?
yep.
I'm gonna mess up this quote, but Masahiro Sakurai, the creator of Super Smash Brothers and Kirby, he has a quote, and it's something along the lines of, "Fold your misgivings into the next project." And I think that's the best way to put it. It's like, okay, do the best you can with this, but if there's something you couldn't achieve, there's always next time, right? And I think that's a healthy approach.
Yeah. So in general, like, I mean, it sounds like you said, I mean, ideally everyone would play your game, and you have like all these hacking like things that are kind of like harkening back to old Yars. I mean, did you have like, how are you balancing that between like people who might like be more into Yars versus like, you know, like my little sister or something.
Yeah, sure. That's totally valid. It's something we've been discussing a lot throughout development, and more recently, like up to the tail end of development, it's become a hot topic because, there's the core players that will want to have like the most like authentic, true experience that we want to present to players, and then there's the ones that are maybe like they like the exploration elements and going from room to room, but it's a little bit more difficult for them to get through the hacking sequences. um, we have different ways of addressing that. One of which is the this concept that we have throughout the game, where you're able to augment or upgrade your character. The more, if a player does a little more exploration, those hacking experiences are actually gonna be a lot easier for them because they explored a little bit more. So if you're leaning more towards I like exploring rooms, well, you will benefit because you will get things that will make that experience more accessible in ways. That's actually just one approach, though. We also are exploring here, even towards the tail end of development, ways to make it so that players that have a hard time with those have some accessibility options as well. So we're always thinking of every player. We want to be as accommodating as possible so everyone can have a fun time. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. We make games as entertainment products. I want everyone that picks up this game, regardless of your experience level with gaming, to have a great time. And we try to balance that the best we can. But we can't get everybody. So we'll do everything we can to make sure everyone can have a great experience.
Do you have anything that kind of go in the opposite direction for like that make things harder if people want a bigger challenge?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I'll take that. Okay. Well, I mean, I think that's pretty much everything I had to talk about. Unless you want to talk about the weather or something. I mean, whatever.
Well, if we could talk about the weather in this game, we made a decision for it to be raining throughout this
Yeah.
game. And like now, like at the end of development, I'm like, oh my God, that was tough. Like, yeah, maybe like if I knew now what it would take to like make that work throughout the game, and if I could tell myself in the past, like we achieved it, we made it work. But oh my gosh, like one decision to outside of development, like yeah, it should be raining outside to like set the vibe and give you like this cool like effect of like raindrops and like yeah, man, it was tough. We achieved it, but it was one of those things like at what cost, man? That was tough to achieve. So yeah, you said weather, and it made me think of that because I'm still in Yars headspace. So there you go. Game development is hard, but hey, we gave it our all, and at the end of the day, I hope people will enjoy the end result of what we've created here. You guys, great questions, by the way. Thank you, Jack.
Oh, no problem. Glad it came off somewhat coherent. So, no, so I appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to the game. I'm looking forward to the rain. So, really appreciate it. All right, that wraps up the interview. Thank you for watching to the end, and thanks again to James for chatting with me for over 40 minutes. If you've ever seen our podcast, you know it's a long time to have to deal with me. Again, if you like the video, please share it or let us know. Whatever you feel like doing is greatly appreciated. Bye.